Well, an option presented itself to me. I think I was possibly in my first year of high school, and my step grandfather passed away. I never knew he had a an acoustic guitar in his bedroom. And one day I'm over at my grandmother's house and I'm wandering around and see this big, pretty guitar, and had a couple strings missing, but I didn't care. It just looked so nice. And I asked my grandmother if I could have it. She said, yeah. So, unlike most normal people, they get the strings replaced and try to play what we consider a guitar. I kind of just played it the way it was. So instead of six strings, I think I had maybe three or four.
The lower ones? Or,
Yeah,
I guess
yeah,
you're playing like
yeah,
bass.
yeah. So, but I just thought it was so cool to be able to pluck those notes out. And what I found myself doing was listening to the radio and trying to play along with some of the songs. And I had a really good ear, so a lot of times I was able to play different melodies. But it wasn't until my sister gave me a Supremes album. When was this? Early high school. But that's when the bass...
James Jamerson?
Yeah, and I didn't know who he was at the time, but just, it was something about the bass that was like really catching my ear. So I'm starting to like pluck along with the bass lines and pretty proficient at it. I'm like, that's the first time I really considered myself having so much fun playing music. Because I just kind of related to the rhythm. That sound of the bass was just like captivating. And it was always there. Unlike with trumpet, when you get into arrangements, there may be a section where you have some trumpets and then there are no trumpets.
Right.
But the bass was constantly there, just kind of laying down this groove. And I'm thinking, this is like, there was a certain urgency about it. Because he was almost like laying down the foundation, even before I could verbalize on what I'm hearing. But that's what I was feeling. This instrument and this person in particular, because I found myself, I didn't particularly like all the basses that I heard.
Right.
But every time I heard a Motown record, I'm thinking, there's that sound again. Oh, man. So Dad bought my first bass, used bass from a pawn shop. I remember taking it might have been a couple days before Christmas, took the number 10 trolley from 61st and Lansdowne, where I lived, down to, I think, around 46th and Lancaster. There was a pawn shop down there. Sure enough, there's this bass guitar there, and the guy bagged it up in a paper bag, and we brought that thing back home on the trolley. And when I think about it, I'm just so appreciative of my parents, in this case my dad, who, did that for me. And got the bass home, and I'm just, I'm listening to the radio constantly. To the point where I would go from my bedroom to my parents' bedroom when they weren't in there, because they had, not only did they have a radio, but they had big mirrors on the dresser.
Right.
And I would watch myself playing the bass. Now, I never imagined myself like performing a show.
Right.
I would imagine myself being the guy on the Motown records.
Right.
So I was in the studio.
Yeah.
So when the tune to come on, I'm like, okay, we're going to do a take, you know, and I'm playing along with it. And it got to a point where I knew almost the entire playlist of either back then WDAS or WHAT, because they had like the R&B format. And I was able to play with just about anything they put on the radio.
So you're listening to Georgie Woods and...
Georgie Woods, what's the other guy?
Spaceman.
Jimmy Bishop.
Right, right.
Uh,
Who's the spaceman? Rocket ship. His son is a DJ.
The Geeter with the Heater.
Oh God, yes.
Jerry Blavitt.
Yeah.
What's his name? Butterball.
Oh yeah.
Remember Butterball?
Right, right, right.
I'm sorry, Jason. I'm
No worries.
moving.
Were you taking any
Bass
formal
lessons?
Yeah. Total. Yeah.
This was total fun.
Right.
I'm just having a ball. And
So you didn't know if you were even doing the fingering right, or?
I didn't even have a tune right. I'm just having this was just my new obsession.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't until, believe it or not, it wasn't until I moved to New York in the mid-'70s that I realized I needed to tune it the traditional way, because that's when I was met with some challenges. My exposure to jazz, being able to walk bass lines, never thought about soloing on the bass. And then I realized I need to tune this thing the way it should be tuned. Up until then, I had my own tuning method. I had recorded and played, toured with groups. Nobody ever asked me, well, how are you doing that?
I wanted to, yeah, I was gonna, so you're playing bass and you're still in high school?
I started in high school.
Okay.
I got my first job actually at the school. I had just finished the orchestra rehearsal playing trumpet, and they were having a talent show later that afternoon in the auditorium. And there was a group there, and they were kind of upset because their bass player hadn't showed. And I opened my mouth and said, I play the bass. And they said, well, can you play with us? And I was like, well, I ran home, got the bass, came back up. I think I must have walked, because I don't know how else. But anyway, got back, played with them, and they were like really impressed with how I played. And I had never thought about pursuing gigs or anything. But they started calling me, asking me if I could make the rehearsals.
What was the name of the band? Do you remember?
Well, these guys, I don't remember who these guys are, but some other people heard me playing with them, asked me to play with them. So to make a long story short, this particular group was called the Timekeepers. And the Timekeepers, little did I know, they were one of the more popular kind of local groups in West Philly. And we used to work, back then they would have cabarets on the weekends. So we would do a lot of cabarets at in West Philly at the Adelphi Ballroom, the Imperial Ballroom, Town Hall. Town Hall used to be at Broad and Race. Yeah, we used to do a lot of things down there, and that's when I actually started doing gigs, mainly on the weekends.
Now, how much did you get paid back then for those gigs?
My very first gig, which I'll never forget, was at the Haddington Recreation Center, which is at 57th and Haverford Avenue. And it was one afternoon, I got paid $5. And I just thought it was amazing that I was getting paid to play. Because I none of this, I never thought that I would pursue or should pursue music because I couldn't think of anyone in my family who was a musician.
Well, that's that's where I wanted to go back to. How'd your parents, your professional parents, feel about their son playing gigs and?
I think they thought it was okay that I was making some money because sometimes I'd make like $25 doing a cabaret at town hall, and I was making a little extra money independently, so I wouldn't have to bug them for more allowance. I think they had an issue when it started to become more frequent. I'm working every weekend. And then when I went to college as a music major playing trumpet, I started getting calls to actually tour with different groups. And this is also new to me. I'm like, tour? Are you serious? You mean like travel to different places and play and get paid? And that became a serious consideration for me. And my parents were like, Lee, I remember their argument was, what are you going to do if like you hurt your hand or something happens to one of your hands? How are you going to support yourself? So I'm thinking, you have a point there. But I really had a passion for doing what I was doing. So I dropped out of Westchester College back then. It's a university now. But I dropped out after my freshman year and did my first tour with a group called Brendan and Tabulations.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
What were you playing in these cabarets? I mean, I assume this is like a little bit of an older audience.
They were, yeah.
Were you playing jazz or were you playing pop?
No jazz. This was all kind of dance music,
Okay.
R&B.
Okay.
So all of us were kind of familiar with what was being played on the radio, and we rehearse with no music and just kind of work it out. And people seemed to like what we were doing enough to keep calling us to do different affairs.
Tell us about the Brenda gig. Where'd you go and
Oh man,
how many piece band was
this
it?
it was like a culture shock because I'm dealing with they were all a little older than me, so I was like the little kid in the group. I was 19.
Okay.
But I remember we did a couple fairly nearby gigs, like the Apollo Theater in New York and the Howard Theater in Washington. But then we got a call to do a tour in Europe. I'm like, this is amazing. Really?
What was the hit they had?
Well, their early
Right on the
hit
tip of my
was,
tongue? Was that-
well, even before that, they had a hit called Dry Your Eyes.
Oh.
Right.
And then it was right on the tip of my tongue. But that's when my parents started realizing this could turn into a career.
Right.
Because I'm going over to Germany, to England, France, and then I'm coming home and like, who's going to believe what I just did?
Right.
But during the time I played with Brenda, which was not that long actually, maybe about a year or two, a fella heard me play and he approached me one night and he said, would you like to play with the Delphonics? And I'm like, okay, this is getting crazy.
That's not Tom Bell, is it?
Oh yeah.
That's who it was?
Well, that Tom wrote for them.
Right.
Yeah, but
The
his
guy-
brother was the band leader, Tony Bell.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he's the one that approached you?
Yeah. And I'll tell you, my parents were very protective of us. So, this whole notion of me being out around older people drinking and stuff like that, they weren't too keen on that. Even a lot of the people I was playing with, they were probably people who I normally wouldn't associate with.
Right.
Only thing we had in common was music.
Right.
What made Tony Bell so different was he was the kind of guy I would have hung out with if I wasn't playing music. Very kind of straight-laced, clean-cut, well-spoken. I'm like, I like this guy, and I'm really liking this offer with the Delphonics because at the time they were
Yeah.
hot. So I joined the Delphonics. We're doing we're playing all over the place.
Now, did you record with them too as well?
I recorded one album with the Delphonics and one album with Brenda and the Tabulations.
Now, did your parents, how'd they react when you dropped out of college?
They were not happy.
Yeah.
No.
I think every musician has that story. I know I do.
Yeah. But it was the first time I really felt compelled to do something, as opposed to trying to keep the parents happy. Because, you get good grades, because, you come home with a bad report card, they're not going to be happy. So you're doing a lot of things just to keep them happy. But this was the first time that I really felt I want to do this for me. And it doesn't matter what the parents think. I'm making money. I'm doing something I never really imagined doing, which is traveling to all these different cities and states and countries. I'm like, this is like priceless, so I think.
So was that crystallizing moment when you said, okay, I'm going to be a professional musician, was that with the Delphonics or with Brenda and, that moment you said, you know what, this is it?
I don't know, because it just continued to where I didn't have much choice unless I just said, I'm just going to stop this for what reason, I don't know. But it was just a continuation of opportunities. Even with Brenda and the Tabulations, that group back then was considered one of the premier opening acts for the larger groups. So I remember opening shows for the Temptations. In fact, we did a bus tour out in California with the Temptations. We're actually on the same bus with the Temptations.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, who's going to believe this back home? And unfortunately, I wasn't into taking a lot of pictures back then, and I really missed out on so many precious moments. I remember doing the Apollo Theater, starting with Brenda. All the R&B groups kind of went through a circuit where they were doing certain venues. Here in Philadelphia, the Uptown Theater, the Warner Theater in D.C. There were just a bunch of places that were just kind of stops on the road. At the Apollo, we would open for Stevie Wonder. I remember one time, okay, I'll tell you two short experiences. One time, We're playing at the Apollo, and there's some woman named Laura Lee who apparently had a hit down south somewhere, and she was on the show. I didn't know who she was, but one night, because we'd hang out backstage and just like check out things, one night she says, I want to introduce a friend of mine who I think you're going to enjoy, and I just want to kind of give him a shot, right now. And his name is Al Green. And I'm thinking, okay, Al Green. And the people seem to like him, but
Right.
then the rest is history.
Right.
The other time is when a group called Love Unlimited was on the show. And they had this big, heavy-set piano player playing with them. Barry White.
Oh.
I'm like, wow, that was Barry White, because Love Unlimited was basically a female group, and then he had his big hit where it's Barry White and the Love Unlimited Orchestra and whatever, and so you think back on those times when you were just right there with those people.